I was 25 years old when my life took a turn I could never have imagined. Until then, my days were defined by long hours of work, restless ambition, and the gnawing hunger to prove myself. I had grown up with little, but carried within me a determination as sharp as steel. I wanted to rise, not only for myself, but for the family whose sacrifices had shaped me. So when opportunity came to work in the empire of a powerful Arab sheikh, I didn't hesitate for a second. It started with an interview, formal on the surface, but I could sense the weight of every question. They weren't just measuring my education or my work experience. They were testing the strength of my will, the honesty of my voice, and whether I could be trusted in a world where trust was more valuable than money. I remembered walking into a tall glass building in Dubai, the Sheikh's company headquarters, my palms sweating but my mind steady. By the time I walked out, I wasn't just another applicant. I was chosen. Being offered the position of CEO at 25 wasn't just surprising. It was almost unbelievable. Many men older, more experienced, and far richer than me had wanted the seat I was stepping into. But the Sheikh believed in talent, not years. He believed in loyalty, not just pedigree. That was my first impression of him, a man who could see through appearances and place his faith in raw integrity. The empire I entered was vast. The Sheikh's businesses stretched across oil, shipping, real estate, and technology. His influence was felt in boardrooms across continents, and his name carried a weight that silenced conversations when spoken aloud. At first, I felt like a small piece in an enormous puzzle, someone who had to run just to keep up. The staff were efficient, but there was always an air of fear. Everyone worked as though a single mistake could cost them everything. And then there was the Sheikh himself, tall, commanding, with eyes that held both sharp calculation and an unexpected gentleness. He didn't waste words, and when he spoke, people listened. To me, he was both intimidating and inspiring. He treated me with courtesy, but little warmth in those early days. He wanted to see if I was truly worthy of the position he had given me. I understood that completely. Respect had to be earned, not handed out with a title. The early struggles were many. I was young, and many of the senior executives doubted me. They whispered behind my back, questioned my decisions, and waited for me to fail. But I worked harder than anyone. I stayed long nights in the office, studied every report, analyzed every contract, and prepared myself for every meeting until my eyes ached. I made mistakes, of course, but I learned quickly, and I never repeated them. The first real test came within a month. A risky investment proposal had been brought forward, one that could either bring the company millions in profit or drag it into crushing loss. The board leaned toward approval. The numbers looked tempting, but something about the deal didn't sit right with me. I stayed up all night poring over the details and uncovered a flaw in the supplier chain. If overlooked, it could have cost the company more than it stood to gain. The next morning, with barely 3 hours of sleep, I walked into the Sheikh's office and laid out my findings. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he gave a small nod and said only 2 words, "Good work." Later, when the deal collapsed exactly as I had predicted, the murmurs in the boardroom turned into silence. For the first time, I felt I had earned a piece of ground beneath my feet. That was only the beginning. Each challenge I faced was larger than the last, but each victory, no matter how small, carved my place deeper into the empire. And while I was proving myself in business, something else was slowly, quietly, beginning to grow. Something I didn't yet recognize, but would one day change the course of my life. After that first victory, life inside the Sheikh's empire began to change for me. What had once been whispers of doubt in the boardroom turned into grudging respect, and then, over time, into something close to reliance. Problems no longer reached his desk without passing through mine first. At 25, I carried responsibilities that would have broken older, more experienced men. And yet, instead of crushing me, the weight sharpened my resolve. The company faced challenge after challenge in those early months. Contracts that threatened to fall apart, partners whose loyalty wavered, investments that teetered on the edge of disaster. Each time, I found myself standing at the crossroads of fortune and ruin. And each time, somehow, I found a way to pull us back from the brink. There was a deal with a European shipping line, that promised massive profits, but came with hidden clauses. I spent nights combing through the fine print until I uncovered conditions that would have tied us into years of losses. Then came the oil rig incident, when mechanical failures threatened to halt operations. While others panicked, I coordinated repairs, negotiated with insurers, and made sure not a single dollar was wasted. The Sheikh later told me that my decision had saved him over $50 million. But it wasn't just my calculations that caught his eye. It was my honesty. Whenever I sat before him, I didn't bend the truth, not even to make myself look better. If I made a mistake, I admitted it. If I succeeded, I gave credit to the team who worked beside me. In a world where men twisted words to climb higher, I chose to stand straight, and the Sheikh noticed. One evening, after a particularly tense board meeting where I had defended a risky but ultimately successful strategy, he lingered behind as the others left. He studied me with that sharp, unreadable gaze of his and finally said, "You don't play games. You don't hide your intentions. That is rare." It was the first compliment he had given me without restraint. From that moment, something shifted. Soon, he began inviting me to his home. At first, I thought it was for work, to discuss strategies away from the noise of the office. But I quickly realized it was more than that. He wanted me to see his world beyond the polished glass towers of his empire. His home was vast, a palace of white stone and high archways, with courtyard where fountains sang softly under the desert sky. The first time I walked through those doors, I felt out of place, like a stranger wandering into a dream. But his family welcomed me warmly. His mother greeted me with kind eyes and a gentle voice, offering food with her own hands. His brother spoke to me not as an outsider, but as a trusted guest. At the long dining table, where golden lamps cast a soft glow, I was given a seat close to him, a place of honor I did not take lightly. Those evenings became a pattern. We would share meals together, the air filled with the aroma of spiced lamb and fresh bread. The Sheikh would sometimes tell stories of his childhood, moments of mischief with his siblings, lessons taught by his father. At other times, the conversation turned to poetry, history, or faith. I listened more than I spoke, absorbing not just the words, but the rhythm of a culture older and richer than I had ever known. I remember one night especially. After dinner, we sat on the terrace overlooking the city lights. The desert air was cool, and the Sheikh poured tea for us himself. "You've given much to my company," he said quietly. "But here, you are not my CEO. You are my guest, my brother." The word struck me deeply. In my heart, I felt pride swell, not the arrogant kind, but the kind that humbles you, that makes you bow your head because someone has given you more than you deserve. To be trusted in business was one thing. To be welcomed into his home, his family, his private world, that was another. I carried that honor carefully. I never let it make me complacent. Never allowed myself to forget the line between humility and pride. Every morning, I still rose early, worked harder than the rest, and reminded myself that loyalty was not proven once, but every single day. Yet in those quiet evenings, sharing laughter with his family, tasting dishes prepared with love, and listening to his stories, something gentle began to take root inside me. Respect was no longer just professional. It was personal. And though I did not yet name it, a bond was forming, woven of trust, loyalty, and something far more fragile, far more human. It was during one of the company's annual galas that temptation first came knocking. The hall glittered with chandeliers, men in tailored suits and women in flowing gowns gliding across marble floors as violins played in the background. I was there, not as an onlooker, but as part of the Sheikh's inner circle. It was a kind of event where every handshake carried hidden agendas, every smile concealed calculations. That night, I was approached by a man whose reputation preceded him. The Sheikh's longtime friend, a magnate with a company nearly as vast as ours. His charm was polished, his words dipped in honey. "I've been watching you," he said, handing me a glass of champagne I barely touched. "You've done extraordinary things for your Sheikh. Young, ambitious, sharp, you're the kind of man I want on my side." At first, I thought he was only offering compliments, the kind people exchange to fill the silence. But then he leaned closer, his voice dropping into a confidential whisper. "I'll pay you double what you earn now. Triple, if that's what it takes. Cars, houses, travel. Everything you can imagine will be yours. His words were heavy, laced with temptation. I felt my chest tighten. For a moment, my mind flickered with images. Wealth beyond measure, independence, freedom to carve out my own empire without standing in anyone's shadow. Any other man would have grabbed the opportunity with both hands. But as he spoke, I found myself thinking of the Sheikh, not as a business partner, but as the man who had given me a chance when no one else did. I remember the nights he poured tea on the terrace, the laughter of his family, the word brother spoken with sincerity. Could I really trade all that for money? I set the glass down on a silver tray and shook my head gently. I'm honored, I told him, but I can't accept. My place is here. He raised an eyebrow, amused. You're turning down millions out of loyalty? Yes, I said simply, because loyalty means more to me than millions. He gave a soft chuckle, as if I were a naive boy clinging to childish ideals. But I didn't waver. My heart had already made its decision. Later that week, word of the conversation reached the Sheikh. I hadn't planned on telling him. I didn't want to seem as though I were parading my loyalty for praise. But somehow he found out. That evening, he called me to his private study. The room was quiet, filled with the scent of oud wood and leather-bound books. He sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable, the silence stretching between us. Then, without preamble, he asked, "Why did you refuse?" I met his gaze, steady and honest. "Because I owe you everything. You trusted me when no one else did. You treated me as family. I won't betray that, not for any amount of money." For a moment, he said nothing. His eyes searched mine as though trying to uncover a hidden motive. But there was none. What he saw was the simple truth. Then, something I had never seen before happened. His composure cracked. His shoulders eased, his lips pressed together, and his eyes glistened with unspoken emotion. "Do you know how rare that is?" he whispered. "Do you know how many men I've helped, only to be betrayed when someone else waved money in front of them?" I shook my head. "I'm not one of them." He stood, walked around the desk, and placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, but his voice trembled. "You're not just my CEO. You are the man I rely on, the one I trust above all. Don't ever leave me." I felt the weight of his words settle into my chest. It wasn't just business anymore. His plea carried something deeper, something fragile and human. For the first time, I saw not just a powerful Sheikh, but the man behind the title. A man afraid of being abandoned. A man clinging to loyalty like it was the rarest treasure in the world. And in that moment, I silently promised myself I wouldn't be the one to let him down. After the night in his study, something between us quietly changed. The Sheikh no longer looked at me only as the man who kept his company afloat. His eyes carried something more personal, something that reached beyond contracts and boardrooms. It wasn't announced, not spoken aloud in the open, but it lived in the silences between us, in the way his words softened when we were alone. At first, it showed in small gestures. He began asking if I had eaten after late meetings, sending dishes from his home if he knew I had skipped meals. Sometimes, when we worked into night, a tray of tea would appear, always brewed the way I liked, strong with just a hint of sugar. I hadn't told him, but somehow he had noticed. On long business trips, he made sure I had the best accommodations, though he never said it outright. Once, when a colleague tried to undermine me in front of foreign investors, the Sheikh cut him off sharply, saying, "If you don't trust him, you don't trust me." That kind of defense wasn't common in his world. Loyalty was expected, rarely returned. Yet he returned it again and again, with a quiet protectiveness that unsettled me in ways I couldn't explain. And then there were the conversations, those nights when the world outside slept and we lingered over tea or coffee in his private lounge. Gone was the commanding voice of a leader. In its place was something raw, almost vulnerable. He told me of his childhood, of growing up under the shadow of expectation, of a father who demanded perfection and a mother who gave him tenderness in secret. He spoke of the loneliness that wealth brought. How men bowed him, but none stood beside him without an agenda. "Power is a cage," he said once, staring into his cup. It shines with gold, but inside it is still a cage. I listened, sometimes speaking, sometimes just letting him empty the weight he carried. Slowly, he began asking about me, about the years before I met him, about my dreams and fears. He remembered the smallest details, repeating them back weeks later. When I mentioned that I missed the taste of a dish my mother used to cook, he had his chef prepare it for me the next evening. It was during one of those late conversations that I first felt the shift inside me. We were sitting on the terrace, the desert night cool around us, the city glowing in the distance. He asked me, "Do you ever feel invisible? Like people see your position, your work, but not you?" I hesitated, then admitted, "Yes, often." He turned to me then, his eyes steady, unflinching. "I see you." The word struck me with unexpected force. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. He wasn't just acknowledging my role in his empire. He was acknowledging me, the man behind the work, the human beneath the responsibilities. It was in that moment that I realized he saw me as more than an employee. After that, I couldn't deny the changes within myself. Professional respect had been the foundation, but now something warmer began to take shape. I found myself noticing the details of his presence, the way his laughter rumbled low when he was truly amused, the way his eyes softened when speaking of his mother, the calm strength in his posture even in moments of uncertainty. I tried to resist naming it. To me, he was still my Sheikh, my employer, my mentor. To cross that boundary felt unthinkable. Yet feelings don't wait for permission. They grow quietly until suddenly they are undeniable. One evening, he returned from a grueling trip abroad. I had stayed in the office late, ensuring his schedule for the next week was perfectly aligned. When he walked in, visibly tired, I stood to greet him. He placed a small box on my desk without a word. Inside was a watch, not flashy but elegant, the kind of gift that spoke of thought rather than wealth. "You've worked harder than anyone," he said softly. "I wanted you to have this, not for business, but because you matter to me." I remember staring at the watch, the room suddenly too quiet. My throat tightened. Gratitude, loyalty, confusion, they all tangled inside me. That was the moment I knew my feelings were no longer something I could pretend away. From then on, every interaction carried an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. When he brushed past me, his hand lingering a second too long on my arm. When he leaned closer during conversations, his voice dropping, his eyes searching mine for something beyond answers. When he asked me one evening, "Do you trust me completely?" And I found myself saying without hesitation, "Yes." More than anyone. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't spoken aloud in grand declarations. It was quiet, steady, almost inevitable. A bond that had begun with respect and loyalty had deepened into something neither of us dared to define, but both of us knew was real. And though the world would never understand, in the privacy of those late nights and small gestures, I began to feel it. The warmth of belonging, the beginnings of love. It happened on a night quieter than most. The Sheikh had asked me to come to his home after a long week of negotiations, promising it wouldn't be about work. I arrived expecting a dinner with his family, the usual warmth of conversation, but instead, the house was still. The corridors were hushed, the lamps dim, and when I reached the terrace, it was only him waiting there. A breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the gardens below. The city shimmered in the distance. But here, the night was stripped of noise, leaving only the two of us and the sound of our breathing. He sat on a low couch, a pot of tea between us, though neither of us reached for it. For a long while we didn't speak. He seemed lost in thought, his eyes fixed on the horizon as though the desert could give him answers. Then, without looking at me, he asked softly, "Do you ever feel empty, even when surrounded by people?" The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, more than I'd like to admit." His lips pressed into a line. "I do too. Every day." He leaned back, exhaling as though the words themselves were heavy. "People see my wealth, my power, the name I carry. They don't see the man inside. They don't care who I am when the doors close. They only care about what I can give them." His voice trembled, breaking on the last word. "And sometimes I feel like nothing more than a transaction. I had seen him command boardrooms with iron steadiness. I had seen him reduce rivals to silence with a single glance. But here, tonight, I saw a different man, a man stripped of armor, bearing wounds he rarely let anyone see. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent, letting him continue. When I trusted you with my company, I expected efficiency, loyalty, skill. I didn't expect. His voice faltered. He turned his face away, but I saw the glint of tears in his eyes. I didn't expect to find someone I couldn't imagine losing. The words pierced me. Before I could respond, he leaned forward, his hands gripping mine with desperate strength. His composure shattered completely. Tears fell freely as he whispered, "Please, never leave me. Beyond the company, I truly like you, not as an employee, not as a partner in business, but as you, as a man who sees me when no one else does." I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought he could hear it. This was the moment every unspoken tension, every glance, every lingering silence had been building toward. And yet, part of me recoiled, tangled in fear. I thought of everything at stake, the company, the empire we had built together, the fragile trust of his family. If I crossed this line, there would be no return. The rational part of me screamed to stay silent, to gently pull my hands free and keep things as they were, to protect him, to protect myself. But then there was the other part, the one that remembered his late-night laughter, his quiet gestures of care, the way his eyes softened whenever they found mine, the part that had slowly, quietly, already begun to fall. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the Sheikh, not the powerful magnate, but a man terrified of being abandoned, a man whose tears weren't weakness, but truth. And in that truth, I found my own. I squeezed his hand in return, steadying him as his shoulders shook. "You've given me everything," I whispered. "Not just wealth, not just position, but trust, a place to belong. How could I ever leave?" He looked up then, eyes red, expression raw. The vulnerability in his gaze struck something deep inside me, something that had been waiting, hesitant, afraid. In that moment, my heart aligned with his, not in the neat, logical way of contracts, but in the messy, undeniable way of human connection. I didn't kiss him. He didn't kiss me. There were no grand declarations under the stars. Only the quiet, trembling truth between us, stronger than any deal, more fragile than any promise. As the night deepened, he leaned against me, his head heavy on my shoulder, his breathing uneven as he tried to calm himself. I held him there, one arm wrapped around his back, my hand steady against his trembling frame. The man who carried an empire had placed his weight in my arms. And instead of fear, I felt a strange, overwhelming peace. That was the night everything changed. That was the night I stopped pretending my feelings were professional. I didn't have all the answers, didn't know what the future would demand of us. But I knew one thing with certainty. I could no longer see him as just my Sheikh. He was a man who had let me see his heart, and in return, he now held mine. In the weeks that followed that night, our world shifted. Nothing was spoken outright, yet everything was different. We didn't need declarations or titles to know what was unfolding between us. It lived in the spaces where words were unnecessary. The office remained the office. In front of others, the Sheikh was as composed and commanding as ever, and I was the CEO, sharp and focused. But when the meetings ended, when the boardroom emptied, and it was only the two of us, our masks slipped. A glance too long, a silence too full, a brush of his hand against mine as he passed a folder. These small cracks in the facade carried more weight than any public gesture could. We carved out secret moments of closeness, away from the eyes of the world. Sometimes it was as simple as a late-night drive. He would call me without warning, telling me to meet him by the garage. And we would slip into one of his cars, a sleek black vehicle that moved through the night as though it were invisible. No convoys, no assistance, no formality. Just him and me, the desert stretching endlessly around us as the city lights faded behind. On those drives, he let go of the weight he carried. He would roll down the windows, let the cool air sweep in and laugh, really laugh, in a way I had never heard from him inside the office walls. His laughter was rich, unrestrained, almost boyish, and I found myself addicted to it. Sometimes he would tell me stories from his youth. Sometimes we rode in silence, and sometimes he would glance at me with a softness that needed no explanation. There were dinners, too, quiet ones, in hidden places, not the lavish halls or golden dining rooms of his palace, but small restaurants tucked in corners of the city, places where no one thought to look for him. We sat across from each other like ordinary men, the table crowded with simple dishes, and I marveled at how natural it felt. No empire, no titles, just two people sharing food, laughter, and the kind of peace I know I had been missing. He grew protective in ways subtle and overt. If I was tired, he noticed before I spoke. If someone in the boardroom challenged me unfairly, his gaze silenced them. Once, during a negotiation overseas, an executive tried to undermine me, speaking as though I were just a young man carried on the Sheikh's favor. The Sheikh cut him off with ice in his tone. He is my voice. If you don't respect him, you don't respect me. I will never forget the look in that man's eyes, how quickly arrogance dissolved into fear, and my admiration for him deepened. It wasn't his wealth or power that drew me. It was the man behind it, the man who loved his mother with tenderness, who carried his father's expectations like chains, who found freedom only in stolen hours and quiet laughter, the man who trusted me enough to show me his tears. But with every secret came the shadow of risk. I thought often of how the world might view us if it knew. His family loved me, yes, but what would they say if they saw the bond that went beyond friendship, beyond loyalty? His rivals, always circling like wolves, would twist it into a weapon, tearing his reputation, his empire. Society, with its sharp eyes and sharper tongues, would never forgive him for loving outside the boundaries it demanded. There were nights I lay awake, wondering if I should pull away for his sake, protect him by creating distance. But every time I tried to imagine it, my chest ached, because the truth was, I needed him as much as he needed me. Our connection wasn't built on fleeting attraction or passing emotion. It felt unshakable, as though destiny itself had woven our lives together. One evening, as we drove along the coast, the waves crashing faintly against the rocks below, I found the courage to voice my fear. What if someone finds out? What if this ruins everything you built? He didn't answer immediately. His hands tightened on the wheel, his jaw set. Then he glanced at me, eyes steady, calm. What we have is not something to be ashamed of. The world will always judge, always whisper. Let them. They don't live in my heart. You do. The words settled over me like a vow, quiet but unshakable. I turned my gaze back to the sea, hiding the heat in my eyes, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we were strong enough to withstand whatever storms might come. And so, we continued in the shadows, weaving moments of light into nights of secrecy. A hand brushing mine beneath the table, his voice lowering when he asked if I was tired. My laughter echoing in the car as the desert wind swept around us. Every secret moment stitched us closer together, until the thought of living without them felt impossible. Destiny, I realized, doesn't always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes arrives quietly, in the shape of a man who looks at you as though you're the only one who truly sees him. And once it comes, there is no turning back. The higher we climbed in closeness, the more the world seemed determined to test us. It started with whispers, innocent at first, like background noise in the hallways of power. Rivals in business, competitors jealous of the Sheikh's dominance, muttered that my rise in his company was too quick, too improbable. Some claimed I was just a lucky boy who had caught his eye. Others whispered worse, that I was nothing more than a shadow propped up by favor, and when the Sheikh grew tired of me, I would fall. I ignored the talk, but I could feel it pressing against me like an invisible weight. At board meetings, I noticed the sideways glances, the smirks just as I began to speak. At dinners, conversations quieted when I entered the room. Their eyes weren't on me as an executive anymore. They were measuring, waiting for cracks, eager to see if I would stumble. Among the loudest voices was his wealthy friend, the same man who had once offered me a position in his own company with a salary so large it could have changed my life overnight. He tried again, pulling me aside after a conference, his tone oily with persuasion. "You're wasted here," he said smoothly. "I'll double what I offered before. You could have everything. cars, property, the freedom to live without anyone's shadow over you. Why stay chained? I looked him straight in the eye, the answer already etched in my chest. Because loyalty is worth more to me than luxury. I know where I belong. He sneered then, as though my words were naive. You'll regret it when the Sheikh moves on. He always does. The warning lingered, like poison in my veins, but I refused to let it root. I had already chosen my path. When the rumors grew bolder, even daring to suggest impropriety between us, I thought the Sheikh might distance himself for the sake of appearances. But he didn't. Instead, he watched closely, watched me. He wanted to see if I would falter, if the whispers would break me. One night, after a particularly vicious round of gossip reached his ears, he called me into his private study. His expression was unreadable, his gaze sharp, testing. "They're saying things," he began, voice low, almost dangerous. "Things meant to harm me, and you. I need to know, why do you stay? Why do you keep enduring this?" The words spilled from me before I had time to measure them, because none of it matters. Let them talk. Let them twist stories. I don't care about their wealth, their offers, their lies. I care about you and about what we've built together. That's not temporary. That's not for sale. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then his shoulders eased, the sharpness in his eyes softened, and he leaned back with something like relief etched into his face. "You mean that," he whispered, as though testing the truth. "With everything I am," I said. It was then, I think, that something shifted in him. He had trusted me with his company, with his fortune, even with his secrets. But that night, he trusted me with his heart in a way that felt final, unbreakable. The trials had not weakened us. They had tempered us, like steel forged in fire. As I left his study, his words followed me, quiet but certain, spoken not as a question but as a truth. This bond is real, not just temporary. And in my chest, I knew, no rival, no rumor, no whispered temptation could change that. It didn't happen with fireworks or grand announcements. The moment came quietly, yet it carried the weight of everything we had endured. At a company gathering, surrounded by executives, partners, and family, the Sheikh stood to give his closing words. Normally, these speeches were polished, measured, statements about growth, vision, and legacy. But this time, his eyes found mine in the crowd, and I knew before he spoke that something was different. He praised the company's achievements, the resilience of its people, the victories that had carried them through difficult years. And then, without hesitation, he said, "Much of what we celebrate today exists because of him." His hand lifted toward me. Not only my CEO, not only the man who saved this company from countless storms, but the man I trust with everything I am. A hush fell over the room. Whispers rippled through the air, but he didn't waver. His gaze stayed steady on mine, and for the first time, he let the world glimpse what we already knew, that this bond was not one of convenience or circumstance, but something deeper. His family's eyes followed his. His mother, who had always treated me like her own, smiled softly, as though she had known this all along. His brothers came to me afterward, clapping my back, their laughter warm. There was no scandal in their faces, only acceptance, as if my place had been carved within their circle long before this night. The rivals who whispered, the friend who had tempted me, the ones who doubted, I realized in that moment how little their voices mattered. What mattered was the man who had chosen to stand beside me not only in private shadows, but now in the light. Peace settled over me like the final breath of a storm passing. I had come into his empire as an ambitious 25-year-old, eager only to prove myself. Yet somewhere along the way, I had found something greater than success. Trust, loyalty, love stronger than any business deal or worldly measure. And as his words echoed in my memory, I knew this was not an ending, but a beginning of a life built together, unshakable and true. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how it all began. How a 25-year-old employee, armed with nothing but ambition and honesty, could step into the world of a powerful Sheikh and end up here. What started as a journey of proving myself, of saving a company and earning trust, became something I could never have imagined. I was no longer just a CEO, no longer just a man he relied on in business. I had become his partner in every sense of the word, his confidant, his equal, the one who held his heart. And in turn, he became mine. Life changed in ways I could never put into numbers or reports. From late-night conversations to shared dreams of the future, from trials that tested us to the victories that bound us, we had walked through fire and come out stronger. We built an empire together, yes. But more importantly, we built love. A love forged in loyalty, strengthened by trust, and carried forward with a promise that neither of us would ever walk alone again. And as I stand beside him now, I know with certainty, our story has only just begun.